Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Hopefully, you are all having a great week. We're going to dive into all the latest in Star Wars news, as well as take your guys' questions and you can ask anything you want. This is a full Ask Us Anything, and as maybe the title of this video indicates, and as those of you who follow Star Wars news, really nothing to talk about this week. A few big stories, but I have some other things in store for us. So if you guys want to keep firing in those chats, we can make this an all chat stream. But I have some other fun things to do. I've seen a lot of people starting to do videos where they're reacting to a lot of big lists online, a lot of people's lists, a lot of big outlets lists. And I wanted to, because we've been doing our fan rankings of all the Star Wars characters, and there's been interest on a lot of our videos we've done on rankings for characters and stuff like that. I wanted to look at what other people are saying are the best Star Wars characters, kind of compare them to what the results of our fan polls for almost a year now have shown us. So we'll see that in a little bit. And then also, we're going to run down today's stories, mostly centering around Andor. We have Andor season 1 coming to Hulu and Disney Plus. We also have new Mandalorian missions coming to Millennium Falcon Smugglers Run. If you are a fan of the Disney parks, we have one of those rides in Disneyland and Disney's Hollywood Studios in Florida. And then they're also going to be using a new Disney technology, the BDX droids, which are very, very cool. If you're not familiar with those, they are actual robots. They're not controlled by people. They have kind of an AI brain, and they move around and they interact, all computerized. So they are going to be using those in the Mandalorian and Grogu, and they've been used recently in the parks, but those will now be coming to film. So we're going to talk about some of those smaller stories, but again, this is a stream driven by your guys' questions. So if you want to keep sending those in to the chat, we greatly appreciate that. It will be first come, first serve. But as always, there are a couple ways to get around that. First is Super Chat. If you'd like to send in a Super Chat, help out the channel, you get bumped up to the top, and we will answer your question first. The other way is to join our Patreon or YouTube memberships. If you are of a certain tier, you do get priority chat access as well. So keep an eye on that. Look at our Patreon. If you are a member of Patreon, if you are of the tier, you will be able to see the post on your timeline for this stream. And then if you comment right underneath there, you can get those comments on that tier on the show tonight. All right, so let's just get into the first topic. And I think the biggest thing, even though it's not necessarily for everyone, but the biggest thing really in the news for Star Wars is the fact that we are getting new missions on Millennium Falcon Smugglers Run. Now, this is a ride both of us have done, as we did it together when we went to Disneyland during Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim. And to be honest, even as a big Star Wars fan, as a big Disney fan, as somebody who was incredibly excited for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and really do love the product they gave us, Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run has always been a little disappointing. And most of that has to do with the fact that they promised that it was going to be a 3-mission thing. So then every time you rode the ride, each time you'd have a different mission, and it would be randomized like Star Tours, and you might get one time and you get a different one another time. And that allowed you to have a different experience while flying the Millennium Falcon, because even though it is kind of on rails, you do get to control it enough to where each time, if you play a different mission, you could get a little better and better. And they also promised the score element, where you see at the end, if you've ridden the ride, you get credits, and you were going to do something with those credits, and you were going to be able to use them. And the score element was going to be a big component. Score element has really never mattered. You can get the app, and you can unlock some like trinkets and costumes for your character technically in the Disney app. Doesn't really matter whatsoever to your park experience. But the big thing was not having the other two experiences. All we've had for, what is it now, 6 years since the park is opened, is the Corellian mission. Well, now we are getting new missions, but of course, with the stipulation that they are following Mando and Grogu. And Disney did put out a fun little video showing the Mandalorian actor who walks around the park walking around with the Grogu animatronic, which is also really impressive, showcasing and teasing what we are going to be getting here in the future. It does sound really cool. It is a little better late than never now that we're 6 years in to Galaxy's Edge, but part of me is a little disappointed still by the fact that like it made sense to not have Han Solo a part of this when it first came out because the story of Galaxy's Edge was taking place in canon and it was after episode 8 where Han Solo has already died. But now that we're shifting it around and we're doing Mandalorian, like part of me is like, okay, cool, Mandalorian, but like, the Millennium Falcon is Han and Chewie, and we
Yeah.
still don't have Han. So it's a little bittersweet, but I am excited to get more. Sanik, when you hear about this, from what you remember from the ride, are you excited about new experiences coming to Millennium Falcon Smugglers ride?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's more for the immersiveness, like being able to sit at the what's the game? The Jarg table, right?
Yeah.
Everything, and it is frankly a bit button mashy. Like you can do it fairly well. You can get good at it, don't get me wrong, but I think there is a plateau pretty easily to it. So
Yeah.
I'm not of the opinion that this is gonna dramatically change experience. This just gets us closer to what it probably should have been. And I mean, you didn't even mention like the whole idea of like, hey, like, when this was first put out as a whole park thing, is like we're gonna have so much more LARPing. There's gonna be people running around with missions and like from First Order, from Resistance, and all that. So the park has become a proper park and not like an immersive experience. And like I think that's fair to say it was always a little overly ambitious for its goals. So it's nice to know that we're at least kind of getting to a point where it seems like things can get a bit closer to that original vision, maybe attraction at a time. And it is very much an attraction forward area of the park. It's not necessarily for like the spectacle of just walking around. Like that's nice at once, but after a while, if you go there second, third time, you're like, I'm either gonna have some cool food and drinks, or I'm building a lightsaber, or I'm on those Rise of the Resistance and everything, right? So that makes way more sense for them to like push that angle. So I get it. I do also have similar feelings, like, oh man, Falcon is his, and I think that just comes down to Han not really being a proper sequel trilogy character. He's obviously in the first one as a big player, and then he's gone. He's dead, and he's only, frankly, even in the situation that he is with the Rise of Skywalker is because Carrie Fisher passed away. So it wasn't meant to really be a thing. It's more like an imagination kind of conjured by Leia before she like passes away in the Force and all that. So yeah, I mean, I get why, being that this is canonically set between 8 and 9, it's supposed to be something like that, and then they're kind of blurring the lines here and there. But at this point, I mean, they've brought Luke in too with his whole Mando look and everything. So it's like, yeah, right. You're blurring every single era that comes with this. Why not do that for the modes? Like, oh, you come during this weekend, like the third weekend of each month, it's gonna be original trilogy focused, right? And then the next month,
Yeah.
maybe it's only prequel focused or like High Republic or something. Like, make it like a rotating staple. I know it's a lot of
Yeah.
money, and I know they don't want to do that, but that's frankly the only way to make it like both an attraction that services at the original intentions of the park and allows people from different eras to enjoy what they like about Star Wars, and makes it a little bit more of an incentive for people to come back, be like, oh man, like I want to check out this and this. You don't necessarily have to change the Resistance ride, but you can at least change Smuggler's Run with a lot of these and
Hmm.
kind of make it your new Star Tours in a sense. So yeah, I would say it's something that I would expect to happen more and more. This is probably a good first step. And it's definitely for Mandalorian Grogu promo more than anything. So I get what they're doing. I just wish that it didn't have to be such a business decision and less of a like, hey, a celebration of all things Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ride is not going to open until the exact same day that The Mandalorian and Grogu is releasing. So it is like a just another kind of promotional stunt for maybe those people who might not be experiencing the movie yet or not even realizing that the movie came out or just wanting to get into the Mandalorian because it's one thing to like see the character walking around Disneyland if you've never watched the show and then be like, yeah, I'll check that out. That that guy's cool. But it's different to actually do a ride with the character. Like there's been so many Disney movies that have been kept alive for so many years because of the fact that they have a ride in the parks, like Mr. Toad or something. Like these things, Disney parks really do immortalize a lot of things. And so to have Mandalorian now as part of that, it's going to create a new audience that might never have been there. So I think it's a really smart thing from a business standpoint. And it does get me a little excited because as awesome as the LARPing element sounded when they announced this land, the fact that they've never delivered on it, like not even for a second, did they ever deliver on it, has always made me wish that they would just go back to making this a celebration of Star Wars, this land. Like, make this all of Star Wars. Like you were
Yeah,
saying, you could have it each weekend be a different theme. But even just on top of that, I think you could just remove all the sequel trappings of the land itself. Rise of the Resistance is a fantastic ride, and they should leave that as it is, but remove the trappings of the sequel stuff, right? Take down the First Order banners, put up Empire banners. The original trilogy is Star Wars. It's what everything is centered around. It's the safest timeline to make a land themed off of. And then you can just do everything else around there. You can have different characters walking around each day or each week from different themed timelines. But I do think it is a big mistake to try to cling on to that theming when at this point they've completely given up on it. Like Galaxy's Edge, the sequel part of Galaxy's Edge can still be canon, but
yeah,
it's not like we're telling new stories that are going to be canonized with the sequel timeline anymore in the land. So I think maybe by 2029 would be the 10-year anniversary of this land. 2030 would be the 75th anniversary of Disneyland. Maybe around then they'll finally decide to, hey, let's retheme it. Let's make it all, kind of a traditional Star Wars environment so that we can have every character, not just from our shows and popular movies at the time, but we can have Han Solo walking around. We can have Princess Leia walking around. We can have Obi-Wan Kenobi walking around. And I think it becomes a lot more exciting Star Wars project because we always talk about how Star Wars is multi-generational. You've kind of just made this land outside of the Star Wars theming and the Star Wars food feel one generational, right? It is targeting the generation who's growing up with the sequels, and it's targeting the people who enjoy that type of Star Wars storytelling rather than just being in a full embrace for all of Star Wars. And so hopefully we get that, and hopefully we may get another ride by then announced at least, because it is a land that definitely needs some additions, and I'm glad they're doing this. But yeah, I'm a big Disney Parks fan. I always enjoyed going, and so this is really exciting to me. But it's not necessarily something that like gets me jumping for joy because this is something that's like more of a about time, reaction than really anything. But it is exciting to hear that the BDX droids are coming to the Mandalorian and Grogu, making their big screen debut. If you haven't seen this, look it up online, look up BDX droids. Whatever you think of Disney, this is one of the coolest things you'll see from them. Their innovations in the Imagineering department are always amazing, and this is super, super cool, and I can't wait to see them more consistently walking around Galaxy's Edge because that will add some life to the parks that they promised with a lot of alien species and the like that we never got. This should at least add a little bit of life in that Star Warsy element, bringing back some of the LARPing a little bit, especially since they can interact with guests. So seeing them come to a movie too will also give it a little bit higher profile. They're just really, really cool. So check them out if you haven't. Sanak, I don't know if you have any thoughts about BDX droids appearing in Mandalorian and Grogu, but it is just more of a cool Easter egg than anything.
yeah. I mean, I think it's just more confirmation that Mando season 3 isn't just gonna be washed over. Like, you're gonna build off of it. That was definitely something that was well received, even if it was just more of a gag than anything. But yeah, no, I mean, lean into that, right? If we're gonna start off, with Din Djarin and his homestead, why wouldn't he go into the city and deal with that, right? Like deal with the passing of Grief Karga, kind of catches up to speed and all these different things. Like, and then Anzellans seemingly have been well protected and have been great servants to the community. And I'm sure that IG-11 now he's the marshal. You got to like do a little bit more extra work and lifting there, especially in cases of like, oh, like things are gonna be a little harsher around without Mando around, and IG-11 is now more of an active, like, enforcer, and they're getting bigger, more, lavish, rich, known, right? So, yeah, it always made sense. I did love seeing the BDX droids. They were like a practical way of making the BX droid obviously come to life. But I think it's like a nice little thing to look at it like, oh, this is more like a heavy duty, like this is like an R4 to the R2 model, right? Maybe something more suited for the outer rims and not for like the core worlds and the mid world and stuff like that. So I like it. I hope that there's a couple scenes with them for sure, especially to start off the film. Build off of what worked in season 3 for Mandalorian of for everybody and connect the tissue, rearrange something that didn't really make sense or work the same. Um, yeah, I mean, if I liked season 3, I'm not gonna deny that, but I know it doesn't work for everybody, but no matter what, you do have to take a lot of where season 3 takes characters it did and, kind of the motivations and everything, and you have to implement them and work it almost like a soft reboot and end up with the final product of the film and the final minutes of the film feeling like that was satisfactory to every Mandalorian fan, for everyone who's
Mhm.
kept up with everything, or people who've only watched the first season or the first 2 seasons and none of the other shows and all that, right? So yeah, I mean, the best way to do it is to just assume like, hey, everybody has to some degree, and if they haven't, we're gonna make it as translatable as possible. And if the first act is a little slower, I don't mind. I think people forget just how much of a gamble it was in 1977 to have 3PO and R2 be your lead characters for an hour, right? Like, and it works. It works even now. It might be a little slow for modern audiences in comparison, but it's still crucial for how that film works. So if you're gonna have all these little things about world building, catching up, and all that, do it. And if they do show up in other places, if they're like somebody who's gonna like this little Anzellan mechanic and his BDX droid kind of come along for the mission, and you get some cool gags with Grogu, with Din, with Zeb, with the New Republic, and all that. Yeah, I would love that. I'd love to see these him like ride into the battlefield of like that snowy ice planet against like mouse droids or something.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun, and I loved seeing the synergy between the park because even though it's no longer like a place for canon storytelling or staging, it is still an important location. They have made it an important location and a very cool location to explore Star Wars. So seeing things cross over is always really fun, and it kind of leads you to think what could be the future of reverse crossover from the films to the parks. So I always love seeing that. Hopefully, it is more of an Easter egg and less of a
Yeah.
like true push at corporate synergy. But yeah, that's that first story, and that's our biggest story of the week. Really, a dead week for news in Star Wars. The second biggest story will kind of just treat as a public service announcement for those of you who don't have Disney Plus. Andor season 1 is now streaming on Hulu, so you can catch up with that before season 2. If you're somebody who canceled Disney Plus for some reason and wanted to revisit Andor, or just never had Disney Plus and want to check it out for the first time, you can watch it all on Hulu. You can also check out the first 3 episodes for free on Disney Plus's YouTube channel. This is a pretty smart move, I think. I mean, I think a lot of this really indicates that the story about Andor's ratings not being as good as the critical response or the fan response for those people who have watched it. They are kind of confirming that they aren't fully happy with the way season 1's ratings were, or at least confirming that they think it should have had more viewers. And I think they're confident in season 2. They're obviously confident in season 1 because it was so well received. It's a good, smart decision to push this out to a wider audience. They already tried to do that with the season 2 trailer. Don't, like I said when we talked about the trailer, don't go too overboard and trying to get the new people that you forget about the old people, the people that made it a semi success viewership wise and a big success critically and financially. Don't forget about us because we're the ones that are going to for sure back season 2. But this is another good way at trying to get more and more people to be on board on that launch day. And I think that's something they seem to really be caring about for season 2 of Andor, is having some type of significant launch day number. And they're really working towards that by doing this and putting it on YouTube for free.
And I think it's a smart move, right? You can't really do the same with the original Daredevil Marvel shows, right? And that's taken Disney Plus by storm. Obviously, it is its biggest original that's been released this entire year, but it's still crucial to build off of that momentum to see how much further you could take the platform for 4 or 5 months, and especially when you know that Star Wars only really has this visions, it will be a drop, especially 3rd season of a show that's not really a show, more just a collection of all these different studios and their, like, efforts for anywhere between, like, 8 to 20 minutes. Yeah, yeah. So, it makes sense. It really does make sense. I think we should also mention that tomorrow there's gonna be a live stream with Tony Gilroy kinda covering all, like, the key moments from the first 12 episodes, season 1 of Andor, so they are definitely trying to push everything about it, like, they're gonna try and I think they're really trying to cover all their bases, like you said, putting it on Hulu, putting it on YouTube, like, that's something that, like, a lot of other studios have been kinda pushing more in recently, like, I saw Halo season 1 entirely was on YouTube at one point, right? So, yeah, I mean, the nice thing about this is that we know it's gonna end with season 2, and we know that the ending is already written because the ending is Rogue
Mhm,
One. So, I mean, it's not anything too much to worry about, but this would be something that in the future, I think we might be able to look back and be like, "Yeah, the diehards got to have that stream with Tony Gilroy and all these interviews, and we're eating all that up." And then the new people who were just catching up, like, had the funky trailer that got them all talking, like, "Oh, is this what Star Wars is about? I thought you said this was serious." And then they see the second one, and then, like you said, people who just didn't watch it in 21, but, are like, "Yeah, I've been missing seeing some live action Star Wars. Here you go." Like, "Oh, maybe, I didn't check out that Skeleton Crew show." Like, they're trying to attack every single avenue possible. I think it's a smart move. I've been seeing Wheel of Time kinda do the same thing as well, so it seems like it's, like, something that's become a bit, like, a trend for a lot of these,
mhm,
marketing and social media teams to really be pushing, and corporates for all these studio are like, "Yeah, do it." Like, this is how it if this is what you have to do in a day and age where, almost every show is guaranteed to have a 2-year break between seasons, you have to be smart about your marketing. You can't just drop like, "Hey, here's all our marketing push in 3 weeks right before." If you're gonna do it, it's gotta be filled with variety. It's gotta be attacking every possible angle, and that's something that I did appreciate about Acolyte, but Acolyte doesn't have anything that it could really draw from other than books without getting spoilers, right? They're not they seemingly are trying to do the same thing with Andor, where they're trying to push the marketing like crazy since it's really the only big show this year, but it seems like they have chances now to, like, really bring in some stragglers and build up momentum and keep people on Disney Plus while they're sticking around for Daredevil and, Skeleton Crew catch-ups and all that stuff.
mhm. No, absolutely, and they've tried this too on TV as well,
Yeah.
with, I believe, Mandalorian before season 3, they put out season 1 and 2 aired on FX and different episodes aired, so they are really going for those surges for later seasons, and I think that's a smart decision. I mean, Andor being a two-season show, we'll see how that works out because it's going to be hyped when people are talking about it. It'd make more sense when we finally hear what the release strategy is if it was a weekly show, because getting more people on board just creates bigger conversation. It makes that demand higher for people who are like, I'm just going to wait and binge it all. It makes the demand much higher to subscribe to Disney Plus immediately if everybody's talking about it. There are a lot of cool things happening. So the more and more people you can have that are capable of watching a season 2 right as it comes out, the better. Disney knows this, and I think that's the smart decision to make this free for people, and really, also for those people who have dropped the service and are like, "Oh, is Andor as good as I remember?" At least giving them a few episodes to kind of, whet their palate and be like, "Oh, yeah, I remember Andor now. It's been 3 years, but I'm pretty excited for season 2 now after just reliving the vibe that I got from season 1." So, really looking forward to season 2, and I think as we get closer and closer, we're gonna find out more and more, and hopefully our news weeks go up. But that's basically all the news we've gotten for this entire week, and that's not even just understating it. We do have like one other little minor detail that I'm actually very excited for. As a big Mara Jade fan, they are releasing a Mara Jade lightsaber hilt at Disneyland and Disney World. You can also get it on the Shop Disney website, but it comes in one of those collectible boxes, a big heavy duty boxes. It comes with a special issue of the comic series by the Emperor's Hand. Pretty cool detail. I mean, I'm not saying it's leading to anything in particular. I've wanted Mara back for a long time. I think it would really help the story to have some type of love interest for Luke. But I don't think this really means anything. But what it does mean is for those people who are interested in this type of thing, I know collecting the sabers and collecting saber hilts is a big thing, and I've done my fair share of it as well. But not nearly as much as some people, where they have walls displaying everything. This is our first foray into Legends only characters coming to the Saber market here for Disney official releases. And I think that's pretty cool because if you want a Corran Horn Saber, or you want a Kyle Katarn Saber, or you want a Jason Solo Saber, this could be the prelude to getting all those things in the future, especially if this sells well. A lot of the times they do these special lightsaber hilts, like the Stellan Geos one they did for High Republic. Super cool. It looked
Oh yeah.
awesome,
Oh
but they
yeah.
put like a $500 price tag or something on it. It didn't sell very well. I'm not sure what the price of this is. I'm sure it's expensive, but I've been to Disneyland multiple times, or at least downtown Disney, where they also sell them multiple times since they released the Stellan Geos, and it's still there and nobody bought it. So like either they've got to drop the price on these, or they have to make them even more limited, which that would suck because then the resale market will be
Reselling.
too
Yeah.
high, or they just price it at a point where people actually consider buying them because these are expensive. I would imagine this one's at least 250 to $300, but a lot of these ones that they put in these special boxes, these limited ones, they price $400 to $500, and I've never bought one because of that. But I would consider buying this one if it was much cheaper. But I still do think it's a really cool story that we are getting a Legends only character in the official releases, because they've kind of shied away from doing anything with Legends only characters. They've done some figures and stuff, but outside of that, they've really ignored it. So this is maybe a cool little first step into having Legends be a little bit broader across the rest of Star Wars merchandising at the very least.
Yeah, and I know if it does lead anywhere, like people will be upset, like, "Oh, you're gonna ruin Mara Jade now that she's in canon and all that." But my counter to that is the people who grew up with Mara Jade are not aware how insane the cosplay demand is for like Mara in general. Even now, like Legends Con and everything, sure, but she's like one of the few people that's jumped off of the page into that public spotlight for so long, and it's because of fans who like appreciated her character and wanted to see more from Zahn, and got to see her in the Jedi Knight game as a DLC, and it kept on building up, and then she just became bigger and bigger and bigger, right? But it's a name that everyone knows. It's a catchy name. It's a quick name. She's got red hair. She's got a really interesting backstory, right? Like, she's got some cool outfits for sure. So I think that's another thing that like people are underestimating, that they won't buy this lightsaber and not start off like their cosplay. Like the amount
Yeah.
of people that I see on TikTok just cosplaying cool new characters like that and old characters for sure. Stellan's kind of hard because you don't really have any sort of visual representation, but we have some. We have like the depictions on the trading cards and all this and that. So we have people interpreting what they get from the comics, what they get from the cover arts and all that. So yeah, I'm sure that if it does lead into something with canon, like with a proper story, with her getting into like a notable role sometime during this New Republic period, yeah, people are gonna eat that up. Even if it's not really as good or the same, the amount of people who will simply start buying that lightsaber, because I think canon's been pretty good about, like, bringing lightsaber hilts to canon instead of just like, "Oh, it's an entirely new redesign," unless it's absolutely necessary, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do the same thing here with Mara.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm just very excited for the possibilities of future Star Wars merchandise. Through Legends, we've slowly started to see them accepted a bit more, not just in the films and shows, but like Galaxy of Heroes has a lot of Legends characters in there. So they are slowly starting to bring it back. We've seen so many video games get remastered and a lot of that. I think they realize the market that's there that they've left on the table, and
Mhm.
hopefully maybe that could at least lead to some new Legends stories, even if we never got these characters in, live action film or even animation. Hopefully, we could get some new legend stories and some books and comics and those types of things. All right, we're going to turn it to the chat here before we turn to some of the comparisons with the character thing that I wanted to do in a little bit, just to if we have some time. But again, we're going to focus on the chat. This is a live Q&A. It's an ask us anything. So this is a type of stream that is mostly focused on what you guys have to say. So send it into the chat. Super chat gets you bumped up to the top. If you're a member of Patreon, you can post over on our Patreon page. If you are of a certain tier or higher, you've got this post on your timeline so you can ask your questions there or just say, hey, my username is this, and I'm going to put it in the chat on YouTube. Cool. I will pump yours up to the top. Also, you can check out our YouTube membership program, which will also get you that access if you're at a certain tier or higher. So check those things out. If not, it is first come, first serve into the chat. We do try to limit it a little bit so that we can get everybody in. But if not, we will get to everybody's questions as fast as possible. We go for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So let's run through this. Starting at the top, we have Anthony Tiff, who said, hope you had a good birthday, Sonic. It was Sonic's birthday yesterday. Happy birthday on air, Sonic.
Thank you, appreciate it. Yeah, it was a good birthday. Pretty calm, work, got some dinner with the fam. And yeah, no, it was good. It was good. So I do appreciate that you guys recognize that I am on this channel and I couldn't come for the stream yesterday, so you're willing to at least accept one more delay, and then we're like, we're gonna be back on Tuesday. It's like, my birthday's on a Tuesday, so yeah.
We'll be back next Tuesday, though, for all of you who are interested in us going back to the Tuesday schedule. That is the plan, barring any delays or changes. All right. Next, we have Anthony, who says, this is kind of off topic, but as you guys probably know, the world has been going crazy for the past 5 years. I would say a lot longer than that. Uh, how have you guys dealt with it? I have decided to stop watching news and social media as it's just negativity. One thing that is crazy about the fandom is that they think the sequel was political when it actually was the lack of politics and story building that was the problem. And this is coming from someone who's a sequel fan. P.S. I was not the biggest fan of The Last Jedi for the same reasons Liam was not, but it has nothing to do with the fandom menace critiquing it for. Okay, okay. I'll skip the next part. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I don't like to get political on this show, but it's kind of the same way you are. I just don't really put as much stock into what other people have to say on social media or what people have to say in the news. I'm my own person. I can believe what I want to believe, and I can accept everything that I want to do, and I ignore the people that are bringing constant negativity to everything. And that approach has mostly made me enjoy Star Wars more. Yeah, there's undeniable, like as we've talked about in the past, you can have an undeniable negative reaction to something and not be negative, but you also can exist in your own bubble and not let what other people say influence how much you dislike something or what you dislike about it. You can dislike something for your own reasons. And so that is very much so what I try to focus on when it comes to Star Wars criticism and my philosophy for how we watch a lot of these things and how I watch not just Star Wars, but any type of media that I consume because it's not just Star Wars fans. I mean, it's every fandom with the internet. There's so many loud people out there who want things their way. And, I try to make my voice loud when I want something because I feel like we all are entitled to our opinion. And if we have a platform, we should use it to try to promote the things we like about a certain franchise. But we'll never condemn other people for what they like.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of address the first part, like Liam said, we don't really try to bring our real world politics into this channel. Star Wars politics, parallels to real world history, like that's kind of how as far as we go, right? So yeah, I agree. I don't love a lot of what's been happening. It's 2020s have been very interesting times, and I'd like them to stop being interesting. That's the nicest way of putting it. But yeah, you can't ignore it entirely. It's gonna be in your face. Like that's kind of whole point of the internet. They're trying to take every single percentage of your time, smart devices, TV shows, streaming, everything. Like it's all trying to take more and more of your time, right? And I think the one thing that as people kind of downplay is that people are just not sleeping as much. We're on our phones when we go to bed. We're checking stuff out. We're waking up. We're it's like constant, right? So that absolutely has an effect on people who like adopted smartphones. Can you imagine kids who've had smartphones in front of their face since they're a year old? And yeah, well, like I've been telling on a bunch of streams, there are algorithms now. The internet is run by algorithms. It's about marketing something to you. It is about propaganda. It's all that. That's undeniable. The internet is not the same place as when Tom from MySpace was like, "Let's have everybody together and have fun," or when forums were the way that people interacted and all that, right? So yeah, and when things blew up in the early 2000s, late 90s, it was because it was like an organic thing. Now you don't really have anything organic like that. You can look at something as like Facebook, where it's like, here's a fan page dedicated to this TV show that I love. Within a year or two, after Facebook just started getting really big in the early 2010s, all these studios bought those like channels and or all those pages and just started doing the official promo. And then over time, it just kind of became like, oh, we have to start talking like how the kids do, have like a bunch of teens tweet like they would or post like they would, because now it's become too stale and sterile for a lot of people. So it's affecting everything. I can't say I've been very pleased with the news the last few years. Just it's been insane the last few months. Insane, yeah. But you gotta learn to like if you want to have it be something that affects you, just keep staring at the screen. If not, if you wanna do something, go do something, right? Like, there's ways to make yourself feel better. You can go talk to somebody, you can engage with people in person, which it's a forgotten art at this point, right? There's just so many different ways of approaching it. If you feel bad about it, tell somebody, talk about it, try something else other than kind of just going back to the source. And it's tough because everyone at this point is addicted to the internet in the same way that like everyone is just casually addicted to coffee, right? It's just you kind of accept it, right? And we don't necessarily have to. So a lot of this negativity sells, and that's why all our media is like that now. Both the real world crucial stuff, and then even stuff like YouTube streamers and crazy thumbnails and stuff like that. So that's what I would say. Talk to somebody, let it out when you have to. And if you need to do something, you want to be active, proactive, there's a lot of people who are organizing and doing things for the different purposes and needs in their lives. And that's when the internet is an incredible tool. That's when you should use it, when you can connect, right? Not just be shoved down one single lane of thought or some sort of action, or just in a lot of cases, just sitting back and being like, okay, there's nothing I can do, so I'm just gonna sit and watch it happen again and again and again. It's not healthy for anybody. So that's what I would say. And as far as the second part, yeah, Phantom Menace, it's kind of funny. Yeah, I do agree that the sequels really, really suck without not having any true politics, right? I mean, the original trilogy, you can argue doesn't, but it is very political. It is taking from 1930s Germany. It is taking strong imagery from that. It is about revolutionary movements. We know George Lucas is a very liberal person. He's literally talked about how the empire is the US military complex and the Viet Cong are what the rebellion is, right? So if your original creator is saying all that and his intentions behind that, you can't deny that. It might not have come off as much because it's so easy to buy into the classic hero's journey and everything, that the very mythological grounding that is mixed in with that. But then, yeah, we don't necessarily need Star Wars to have the prequel level of like, here's this exposition dumps and stuff that 5-year-old kids will not understand. Maybe they'll appreciate later, and then they'll be like, "Why is it so clunky? People don't really talk like this, even in politics." So when you come to the sequels, and you got JJ, and he was like, "I don't want anything prequel related," which included politics. Yeah, that does make a lot of the sequel stuff like uneven. Like, what is the reason? All that. Now, I think what's been funny is that a lot of like the First Order's motivations, as silly and crazy as it seems, unfortunately, with the way things are going around the world, it's not that insane to be like, hey, they kind of got that right a little bit, right? That people won't show up to fight them, right? When a second wave comes, right? So yeah, I think they've got that part somehow right, but they don't have any substance behind it. They don't have anything pushing past it. We have no clue what happened with the New Republic unless you read Bloodline, right? We have no clue what happens with the New Republic and its remnants other than like the citizen fleet that comes in the Rise of Skywalker. Like, what is the bridge from episode 7 to episode 9 for that to happen, right? Like, that needs to be fleshed out. I wouldn't be surprised. I know people have been saying Clone Wars. We need like a Clone Wars show for that 1 year gap. And we might still get something like that, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a lot more focused on like the politics, on the people who are fighting to kind of piece together the galaxy to keep it running and like what's going on with the First Order. Are there really resistance sympathizers? Like, are they being kind of silenced and quenched in a lot of ways? Or is the New Republic stragglers kind of almost like holding themselves back through inaction and all that? There's a lot of things you can do, not just American politics, but you can just look at so many historical examples. History repeats, goes in ebbs and flows, and there's a lot of ways you can implement that into the sequels to make them age better if you have something that is like a live action show or like a animation. So, yeah, I mean, I get the critiques what the Phantom Menace is saying because it's we know for a fact that JJ didn't want to have any politics, but
Yeah.
it is kind of funny. I think looking back at it now that strangely, at least the origin of episode 7 and everything kinda going on, feeling like it just sorta happens. It's unfortunately aging quite well.
Anthony also says, I read The Rise of Skywalker issues 1 and 2, or issue 1 that came out about 2 weeks ago. It was cool. There was a flashback with Lando and Luke in a scene where Palpatine is scary and where Rey healed young Anakin Skywalker Crystal. That sounds a lot more in depth than the opening we got of the actual film. I gotta check it out then. I have yet to read any of the comic versions of the sequels. It just never really appealed to me. I collected all of them for Force Awakens and Rogue One and never read them. It was back when I was buying every Star Wars issue as they were coming out. But never read any of the sequel comic adaptations. So had really no plans to read the Rise of Skywalker one, even though we had kind of heard that it might feature some details that were a little bit more expanded upon. Now coming out, so much after the film, 5.5 years after the movie came out. So that's pretty cool. I'm glad it does have some extra details. Hopefully, by the time it wraps up, we hear it's one of the best of the comic adaptations of the Disney era movies.
Yeah, I mean, I know that it has kind of fleshed out stuff, pulled it from the novelization. I found it very interesting that they didn't bring Eye of the Webbish Bog into that. So
Mhm,
maybe it's being saved for some part of the issues with the Rise of Kylo Ren and stuff. Oh, not the Rise of Kylo Ren, sorry, the Legacy of Vader
mhm.
Kylo Ren comics. So yeah, I mean, that's cool. I've been behind since Battle of Jakku. Just been it's been crazy too much, just activity wise for me. So I wanna get back into comics, but yeah, I'm just, like, struggling to get caught up on my TV shows and stuff like that too, right? Like, I'm just getting through Invincible, I'm still not caught up on the Marvel Netflix shows because now Daredevil Born Again's out, Wheel of Time season 3 starts tomorrow, and I'm like, "I didn't have any time for that," and there's just so many things, right? So comics, they're easy for me to read and they're quick, especially since I usually just read them digitally, but man, it's tough when you don't have time to catch up, and I think I might probably kick into gear once and checked out that adaptation once we know, like, the Segura new post Battle Jakku
Yeah,
run really
yeah.
kicks off and that new 2025 wave fully takes over and not just, like, stragglers of the 2020 era.
Yeah, I've been behind recently too. I really was pushing in December and early January to get caught up on the main through line Star Wars stories, and I still have some mini series to catch up on, but I caught up on pretty much everything and then haven't really read since the beginning of January. I was really cramming as well before my trip, and then I was gone for a few weeks, and it's been a not a convenient time to read comics either. But I did catch up on Daredevil. I finally watched the episodes last night and did enjoy it. It was pretty cool. I watched the other series back when they came out. Like I was like, I've never been a huge TV guy, but that was one of the few TV shows that when the season one came out, and I was already a big comics guy, so I was like, really excited to watch that. Watched it, and then season 2 and 3 were like night one binges for me. I watched most of them in the first day when they were on Netflix because that was just such an amazing show when it was coming out. It was so much better than every other superhero show that had come out. So Yeah, it took me a little bit to motivate to watch the first 3 episodes of this Daredevil, but hearing it was as good or a similar quality made me excited. Checked them out last night. Say it's really solid so far. Going back to the chat here, we have Critical Thinker said, I recently listened to the audiobook for Darth Bane, Path of Destruction. Really enjoyed the book. Bane is a cool character. The backdrop of the war is fun, and it's a great exploration of the Sith. Completely agree with everything you've said. That was my most recent reread of Darth Bane, was all through audiobook, and my kind of audiobook craze that I really got into starting in 2020-ish when the pandemic hit, and I was doing a lot of walking while gyms and stuff were closed, and I really enjoyed listening to all those stories again that I'd gotten into when I was younger, and the audiobook is a fantastic way to do it. Lucasfilm, when it was run by George Lucas, got into the unabridged audio game pretty late. They had some CDs for certain things, like New Jedi Order had some CDs, but not for every book. And really was later in the run that they started producing these really nice, high quality Star Wars audiobooks in partnership with Penguin Random House and Del Rey. And basically, if the Darth Bane trilogy ones, the Thrawn trilogy ones, the Hand of Thrawn duology, those are all as high quality as they're making now. So if you're somebody who's worried about, I tried to listen to the audiobook for Jedi Apprentice, or I tried to listen to the audiobook for Crystal Star, and it was an abridged, mediocre audiobook. That's not the case with the Bane trilogy. So definitely a cool one to check out. Completely agree with you, Critical Thinker. It's one of my favorite Star Wars books. It's in my top. If I had to do like single books, it's probably in my top 5-ish or so. Path of Destruction, top 7 to 5. I really love that book, and I love how it stages the entirety of the trilogy. So really glad you enjoyed the audiobook version.
I think I can really add to that because I haven't listened to the audiobook, so I'm glad you got a chance to experience it that way.
Critical Thinker also said, what's your least favorite change that occurred in the New 52? What are your thoughts on the initiative overall and how it was handled? Oh my gosh. Well, that could really go on forever. New 52 gets a bad rap. It was really good for a lot of different series. Swamp Thing was really good. Animal Man was really good. Batman was good in his main line, Detective, and then when they did Dark Knight, not as good. But the biggest flaw, I think most people agree, is Superman. They did a poor job with Superman, both his main series. Action Comics was a little better. Uh, who took over Action Comics? Was it Dan? I know Grant Morrison started it, and it was all right as a reboot. Not one of my favorite Morrison things, but looking over at my DC collection, trying to remember who jumped on. Was it Jurgens? I know he did Rebirth, but I can't remember who was doing New 52 action, but it was better. Might have been Greg Pak, maybe. I'm not sure. But it was better than Superman. But I think overall they just kind of flubbed Superman. He wasn't. They tried to make him more in line with like the Zack Snyder-y, Christopher Nolan-y version that we were getting with Man of Steel, but they lost a lot of the things that make him Superman. Obviously they ditched the red trunks. They ditched the kind of truth, justice, and the American way personality, and they went for somebody who's a little bit more edgy and grounded and realistic. And then they gave him a relationship with Wonder Woman, which I don't have an inherent problem with, but the Lois relationship is so iconic and so much better. Uh, could have just stuck with that. So that was kind of my biggest gripe with New 52. There were a lot of other characters that were changed for kind of no reason. You look at like a Wally West, you look at uh what they did. Green Lantern was actually really good at the beginning, and then it kind of fell off because it was one of those series that just ignored that the fact that they rebooted. They just kept going with Jeff Johns' Green Lantern because they were at the end. So I really liked Green Lantern, but Batman I think is the best overall. Justice League had its moments as well, but Batman, Scott Snyder's Batman is seminal. Obviously, Court of Owls, 0 Year, Death of the Family. There were so many good stories there, and it didn't wrap up the best, but Very few Batman runs have ended on a high note, but I thought it ended on a better note than Tom King's. So if you're just kind of comparing the two big ones from recent years, I preferred Scott Snyder's. But overall, I thought I mean, it's a decent initiative. It was a good initiative because they had great talent. That's what made it palatable. I think in hindsight, it ruined a lot of things and it really screwed up the universe for a few years. And then they had to go with, I saw you asked a doomsday clock later. They had to go with Rebirth and really fix things and try to make sense of the timelines again, which is what, DC has struggled with forever. Was, uh, they had so many timelines and then they brought them all together and really shrunk down the amount of timelines and amount of multiverse stuff that we had in the 80s with Crisis, and then decided to bring it back with Infinite Crisis, and then they shrunk it down again, and then so it screwed up a lot of that stuff. Uh, it it did kind of overstay its welcome, and it didn't bring enough original to like you know be a new. If you're rebooting the entire universe, it could have done things a little bit more original across the board, but really all it did was try to like fundamentally change heroes that DC considered out of date, like Nightwing, like Superman, like some of the Flash characters. And then with other characters that they thought were cool, they're like, okay, just leave them the exact same way that they were before and basically act like nothing ever changed, like Batman, like Green Lantern. And those were the ones that worked the best. So that was a long winded response. But yeah, I think Superman was the worst part. And Batman, Swamp Thing, Animal Man, Green Lantern, Justice League at times, those were the best things throughout New 52.
Nothing I can add there.
And then I'll go to the bottom, critical thinker, because you had responded a little bit to what I was saying. Said, yeah, Superman was super inconsistent throughout New 52. Morrison's action and Unchained were good, but other than that, it ranged from mediocre to bad. Yeah, I agree. I forgot about Unchained. That was Scott Snyder book, I believe. I read that in singles when it was coming out. That was New 52 was like right when I was getting back into comics. I was big into it as a kid, and then Dark Knight movies got me like so hyped to read comics again that like when I was in sixth, seventh, eighth grade, I was really getting back into it. And so I was reading everything that was coming out from like Batman and Superman at the time. I was so hyped for Man of Steel, so I was reading a lot of Superman, and that was underwhelming getting back into it. But yeah, I forgot about Unchained, that it was a decent book. Um, and then says, I feel like there are great runs in New 52, but the overall state of the universe really worsened compared to post-crisis era. Completely agree. And that's what I think that's New 52 is a great it achieved what they were going for, and that it is a good spot for people who never read DC to jump on to some of the best characters in DC minus Superman. Because almost everybody had some good story at some point. Like even Azzarello's Wonder Woman was pretty good at times. Not my favorite, but a lot of people really love that run. Almost every character had some good story. Superman was just the one that they just seemed like they were like really trying to make him cool again. And that's not why people like Superman. It's because he's cool. They like him because he's the complete opposite. He's the goofy one. He's the fun one. He's the one that preserves what we all want to be. So I think they lost that. And ultimately that did kind of hurt the entire initiative, because when you have a great Batman, a solid Wonder Woman, and a mediocre Superman, you need that trinity to really carry everything. But yeah, then the critical thinker said, same man. I also got back into comics around New 52, then went back into reading the post-crisis stuff and ended up disliking New 52 as a result. Yeah, I agree. The universe as a whole wasn't that great, but individual storylines are really good, especially in hindsight, when we can go back and be like, okay, the universe is more fixed now. We can look at these stories as not what we're stuck with and things that happened in the past. It's a little more it's easier to palate, and it kind of the same way like you're kind of talking about with Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi, and why New Jedi Order I think especially has had such a resurgence amongst readers recently, is that we can look back at those things and be like, this was a cool story that they did back then, not something we're stuck with now, and how do we fix it. That's why the prequels have had a second life. It's why so many things get a second life, is because when you're distanced, you can look back and say, okay, we're not immediately dealing with that now. It's kind of fixed, or we're going in a direction that we like a little bit more, or we have new problems, kind of like with Star Wars. Sometimes there's new problems that supersede the old problems. And you can say, that thing back then that I didn't like, there are elements of it that are actually pretty cool. And I disregarded those elements because I was unhappy with the product as a whole. And New 52 is actually absolutely kind of a result of that. There are some good things that maybe under the umbrella of New 52 people disregarded in the past.
Again, nothing else I can add. I'm just listening with you, like you guys.
Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed that little DC side mission there. Let's get back to Anthony Tiff in the chat, who said, I'm really excited for the Revenge of the Sith re-release in April. It would be the first prequel film I've seen in theaters. It was also the first Star Wars film I have seen since The Rise of Skywalker in theaters, that is. That's awesome. How did you not make it out for Phantom Menace last year? That was an awesome
Huge one.
event. They
Yeah.
did a great job with that, and Return of the Jedi too was good. But I'm glad you're going to Revenge of the Sith. As you know, most of the people who follow our channel know, my favorite Star Wars movie, first one I ever saw in theaters back when I was 7 years old. So it was a really exciting time for me. I got to see it last year when we did the Skywalker Saga marathon for the first time since 2005 in the theaters, and that was really amazing. But I'm going back again, obviously. I'll probably go back at least 2 times, maybe 3. I really, if it was up to me, if I didn't have other things going on in my life, I'd go every day. But we'll see. We'll see. It'll probably be out for about 2 weeks. So try to make the most of it being in the theaters. It is the movie I've seen the most in my life, and definitely one of my favorite movies ever.
Well, it's just an absolute ride, right? So I think that's what's like, because I mean, we just saw it in May, and like I think I'm gonna see it again at some point pretty soon here. So I'm like, do I really need to see it again? Like, probably gonna see it at a standard theater. We saw it at RPX when we did our May
Yeah.
the 4th, and I still had enough good by that point because it's only the third film, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I think I might honestly just do 40X for this film because we never got it for The Phantom Menace, for Return of the Jedi. I would not wanna enjoy Empire Strikes Back in 40X. That just seems so antithetical to the whole point and the somberness of that film, but for Revenge of the Sith, oh man, I can't wait for the Youngling Slayer 9000 to be cutting through my body, and I get sprayed with water and thrown up into the air, feel the heat when I'm burning up alive like Anakin on Mustafar. That's how honestly how I might experience it. The question is, am I gonna experience it as the first way in 2025 for the anniversary, or if I'm gonna go watch, like, with a bunch of other people standard, or am I gonna do with a bunch of people with 40X? I don't know. I'd love to just be able to take, like, a whole row, like, all my friends be like, "Let's just go crazy," and just, like, yell at the screen and yeah, all the settings at max.
I didn't know they were releasing it in 40X. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
I'll go see it then in 40X. I'm gonna see it at least twice. So
Yeah.
uh this it's one of those things that I am a little bummed we got to see it last year, because I've been waiting for Revenge of the Sith back in theaters for so long. And it was just like, yeah, getting to see it last year, even though it was a lot of fun, it was really cool to be in that format. It does make this a little less exciting. Like I wish I was with the rest of the world. But I think one of the things that will be elevating that excitement level is the fact that it's so many people's favorite Star Wars movie, or so many people love this movie, that I think the theaters will be really packed for this movie. Like Phantom
Oh,
Menace
yeah.
did really well. It cracked the top 5 in box office last year when it re-released. It did better than Return of the Jedi even did. But I think Revenge of the Sith has a chance to, like, depending on what's out at that
Oh.
time,
Oh, yeah.
really
Oh, yeah.
crack like top 3 of box office. Could be in number 2, because it's I think this movie's gonna make 15 plus on its re-release weekend. Like, people are hyped for Revenge of the Sith, and not a lot of people got that chance to see it last year, or in any of the years they've done these marathons. So this is gonna be seeing it with a crowd, I think, is going to be the thing that gets me back at that excitement level where I was last year, seeing it in theaters. Anthony says, I really hope as you gain more subscribers that the hate comments don't start in the chat and they don't come after me. Well, Anthony, I mean, we can't really guarantee either of those things. um, but we'll do our best to police what we can. Can't censor everyone. Everybody's entitled to their opinions. And you're also entitled to continue to fight back, but we will do our best to defend you if it's especially if it's in these live streams. We'll of course defend you, but it's hard to keep track of the comments now with the polls and everything. The way YouTube channels work, it just shows you what's come most recently, the comments and what hasn't. So it's very difficult to keep track of all the comments that are coming out. So um, that's why sometimes if you comment on a video, anybody nowadays, sometimes we miss it because it's difficult to keep track of them. We get so many comments now, but yeah, so it'll be difficult for us to police the comment section. But on these streams, rest assured, as long as it's not, if it is uncivil, we will always be there to protect our audience and protect the people that have contributed to our streams so much over the years.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, if we think it's just going way too far, it's not in the spirit of like good discourse, of good, just debate about Star Wars and whatever topics come up. We'll give a warning, but if it continues, yeah, we can run, and we're entitled to run our channel as we see fit. So if we both feel like, hey, this feels like it's gone too far out of hand, or just like it's just too extreme immediately, yeah, you're done. Simple as that. It's we're not trying to. I think we've been really proud about the space that we cultivated for a lot of people, where you can be someone who absolutely loves Legends and has no love for the sequels or anything canon, right? Or you can be someone who just has no interest in the EU, or like just felt like, yeah, it wasn't really for me when it was coming out. You should be able to speak with each other, have lively debate, but not feel like, oh, I have to like beat up the other person, make sure they know exactly what I'm saying is exactly what it has to be. Like, no, no, like even I don't agree about everything when it comes to Star Wars, but yeah, I mean, we can't disagree that we do have a lot of similarities, but yeah, especially with this channel, we both branched out in different ways, and that's healthy. So, that's how we want that to be replicated with our fandom.
Yeah, absolutely. Christopher Barker says, "Hello, lads. Is it true a new saga removed from the Skywalker saga?" Not sure I understand what you mean, Christopher. If you want to clarify that a little lower in the comment section, we'll come right back to you. I don't know if you know what he's talking about, Sanak.
I'm assuming maybe the Kinberg trilogy, because it's not officially announced as 10, 11, 12. Like, it may as well be, but I guess that's like the only, like, I mean, if you say new saga, we haven't really had like any discussions about, I think, past three films. Maybe if you're going all the way back to the Benioff and Weiss stuff when they were like maybe doing five or something. But yeah, not. I'm assuming Kinberg. I know there's a lot of rumors floating around. Maybe there's some things that are just like, blended together, like this new Jedi Order film with whatever Kinberg's doing. Especially since like they are trying to posit Rey as like that's the future of the franchise has to begin with her at least moving forward, right? So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's what you're saying, Parker.
A critical thinker said asked a question at the bottom that I saw that was kind of piggybacking off what we were just talking about. So I was thinking of bringing it up right now. It says, "What are the biggest things you two disagree on about Star Wars?" And I'm trying to think off the bat. I mean, our film rankings are fairly
They're different.
different, except for our top three. I think are the same, with
Yeah.
just a different orders with Empire, A New Hope, and Revenge of the Sith. Um, but uh but yeah, I'm trying, so I mean we disagree a little bit on the sequels. Like I've certainly soured on The Last Jedi more and more over the years. Still think it's a solid movie in a lot of ways, but Sonic, you rank it pretty high, right? It's like your top
It's my
5 or
number
so.
4, I think,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah,
and
and,
it's
like,
dropped.
sometimes it fluctuates a little bit, but I really appreciate the filmmaking and intent behind it.
Yeah, and for me it's dropped, I think, to like my number 7 if we're just talking Skywalker Saga. Um because I try to be honest, and I truly do prefer Phantom Menace over it. It might not be better it made, but I like that movie more. Um, And I think the other thing, and we've had disagreements over Acolyte. I'm not really sure where you stand with that now, but I still really don't like that show. We've disagreed. I think we were on the same page about Boba Fett. We've
Yeah.
disagreed in the past about Mandalorian season 3. Um, and I'm trying to think. We don't have too many major disagreements. I think I tend to gravitate a lot more towards some of the Legends books and stuff um, than you do in terms of like you're a big fan, or you've been a bigger fan of what they've done and some of the things in canon than I
Mhm.
have. But I still do like a lot of most of canon that we've gotten in terms of publishing. So I don't know. I can't think of like anything we've had a major disagreement about in Star Wars. I know we were on pretty separate pages
Yeah.
about the Acolyte when it was coming out.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
other than
I don't know.
that,
I don't think it's changed too much for me. Maybe like a little bit more of a like tiny drop, but like it's also I don't know, like we had Skeleton Crew, so I haven't really put in a lot of time or effort to think about the Acolyte. And I know there's like some comments critical thinker also made like, yeah, maybe I'm a little optimistic about how and like the sequels and how they can get an injection of like politics that is important to Star Wars.
yeah,
That's how the galaxy runs, right? So yeah, I mean, maybe it's because I haven't had to necessarily ever look at Star Wars as something that needs to be absolutely fixed. I always assume that it's gonna come in it needs a couple of things to be patched up here. It always needs something to be boosted up or something that needs to age a little better. It's always kinda like that. And that's how I've always looked at it. So Acolyte is in that bucket. I just haven't had any real time to think or play around with that, in my head, and I'm very curious where Phase 3 of the High Republic ends, and we're both really big fans of the High Republic. We just have more issues with, like, how it's kinda been played out, like, how
yeah,
long it's been. Sometimes the intercrossing of mediums is a little messy, especially in Phase 1. So yeah, I mean, when we say like we have things that we disagree on, it's not to the point of like, oh, we have spats. It's more like, no, we're just like, no, I'm of the opinion of this, and I'm of the opinion of this. We both try to like convince each other a little bit here and there, but at the end of the day, we're like, yeah, I mean, whatever. You like it, you don't like it. We got
yeah.
another thing in 2 weeks. It's like, we don't have to really worry about it like that. That's the nice thing about Disney Stars that I think can be a beneficial thing to look at compared to like EU, especially late EU, where George was starting to get a little stranger and weirder, and people who loved like the '03 to '05 initiative of Clone Wars absolutely were not fans of him and Filoni just kind of like tearing all the different levels of canon there. And Leland Cheese like, I'm gonna make a timeline one day, I promise, right? And stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I do like that we can constantly get new things, and it keeps pushing us. And yeah, I'm sure that it'll be harder for me to have nostalgia for some things. That's the flip side of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I'm kind of happy with this as it is. It's just, what like a generation ago would have been like nostalgic for like, oh, New Jedi Order was just so much better than Legacy of the Force. And now for us, it's like, oh man, Skeleton Crew was just way more fun and deserving of recognition than, Book of Boba Fett, right? It's just the medium has changed, the type of expectations have changed. Our interests are obviously more aligned with visual medium in general, right? It's hard to compare like stories from like earlier times of Star Wars when we know they're more literature based. Like there's no budget for literature, right? There is a budget for everything else, right? When it
Yeah.
comes to franchises, and I think that's why when people are like, "Oh, I love this," I'm like, I agree, but I also know that it's not always a fair comparison. So that's why I don't really get worked up into big disagreements because the visual stuff is just so much harder to execute properly to everyone's purest vision, and it's always going to be messy with Star Wars because it's been messy since 1983.
Yeah, and for me, like, I think especially with the Acolyte, I was off put from second one just because there's certain film pet peeves I have, and
Yeah,
we were talking about this the other day. We were texting about this with, Captain America. It's just like
yeah.
exposition, and poorly written exposition is just one of my biggest film pet peeves. Like, I just cringe so much. And I don't like to use that word because it's so overused now, but it is just like makes my skin crawl. It just makes me want to just like hit my hand against my head and just be like, when is this gonna be over? Because that movie had so many bad exposition scenes. And That's how I felt with The Acolyte, was like, a lot of people were criticizing a lot of different things at the beginning of the show, but for me, it was like, "Oh my god, the writing, the dialogue, the about the exposition and some of this stuff is just awful," and I was really struggling with it back when, like, there was still a little bit of an open discussion around, like, are the first 2 episodes good or bad? And it seems to be that some of the episodes people liked the most by the end of the show, so it was like, that I think that's where, because that's really the show, I think, when we look back at it, like you're saying, we never really have spats or arguments really outside of, like, the merits of what we think is are good and bad, and most of it you guys see on the
Yeah.
but, like we I think that was one of the few things that, like, just right off the bat, we were kind of, like, not on completely different pages, but we had different criticisms, and then as the show went on, it was like, I feel like I was definitely more hyper fixating on a lot of different smaller problems that I might let go because I was off put by the first 2 episodes where you're, like, giving it a chance, and that's why our initial discussions around The Acolyte, I think, seemed fairly divided, I guess, when you can look at all the rest of our coverage of the other shows. But yeah, good question. Thanks for that. And then scrolling back up to the top here, and we'll get to this. I do want to go to the second topic here in a few minutes, but we'll do a few more questions here, and then again, if you have a super chat or if you want to put a super chat in, your questions at the bottom, you want to make sure you get it on tonight's show. Super chat bumps up to the top. Also, check out our Patreon, YouTube membership programs. You do get special chat priority in those as well. Critical Thinker also said thoughts on Rock of Ages in Morrison's JLA. Thought it was a nice look at some ideas Morrison would revisit in Final Crisis, but without some of the sloppiness of that event. For those of you who don't know, this is DC Comics talk again, but I love Rock of Ages. It's arguably the best story in the entirety of the 90s JLA run. It's Morrison's best story. As much as I love the first story, which was then turned into the first few episodes of the like Justice League show most of us of our age all know and love from the early 2000s. Rock of Ages has Darkseid, and I love Darkseid. He's one of my favorite villains ever. So I loved Rock of Ages. It's super fun. Definitely has that Morrison brand of like kind of metal mixed with wackiness and craziness, and it's a really good story. And I agree as well about Final Crisis because he Morrison is an encyclopedia of comics, not just DC history, but he knows his comic history and he really plays to it. And one of the weaknesses with Final Crisis is how insane he can get with that. And Rock of Ages is a little more tame because he's writing a Justice League book. So it's a great little story. I think the only other story in that entire run, and it's not Morrison, but Tower of Babel under Wade, which followed up in the same book a few volumes later, is another excellent one that was made into the movie Justice League Doom. If you guys want to check that out, it's a great animated movie. And then one that I really love and never hear anybody talk about it, but really loved it also from Wade's side of that run is the World War III story, which has like everybody in it. And it's a kind of like as close as you can get to an event without it being an event. Really fun story. I could talk about DC forever. Hopefully, I hope we keep getting more DC questions as we get closer to Superman because I'm very, very excited as we're inching closer and closer. I'm hoping we're getting more Superman promotional material here pretty soon as well. Then Anthony says, I'm excited for Celebration Japan. The list is stacked. Sam Witwer, Hayden Christensen, Rosario Dawson, Vanessa Marshall, and Anthony Daniels. Yeah, and the list goes on and on. I know Oscar Isaac's supposed to be there. Even more people than I can't remember are supposed to be there, and we won't be there. But if anybody else is going, we say this anytime Celebration's brought up, let us know. We'd love to, hear from you guys what was shown and what is being advertised and previewed at Celebration because it is sounding like it's going to be a really big one despite being overseas.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna have a day less. That's always kind of been the case with everything outside of the States. But I'm hoping that we are gonna get something substantial, right? Like we had some cool announcements at Europe last year. Don't get me wrong, but if you're gonna do these kind of back to back, one of these have to almost be important, right? We've always been like, okay, here's something outside of the States, come back to the States. Something outside of the States, come back to the States. You got to do something big, all right? And I think it's maybe a little riskier to do it at Celebration Japan, and there's definitely gonna be things that they're gonna hold back and that they're gonna be leaked like crazy, honestly, because of, like, that stringency that is there with Celebration and the fact there's gonna be even less people checking it out. But I'm of the mind that we're gonna get something kinda big. It just there's just no way that after all this kind of like discussion the last few weeks about Kathleen Kennedy and the last few months about all these different films and how New Jedi Order is going and just Ryan Gosling news, like everything's building up to something, and I am expecting things to actually pay off. So to some degree, right? I really do that. I believe that, but it's a waiting game. So that's how it's gonna be.
Yeah, it is, and they have to do something big because we don't really know anything about Star Wars. As of now, after this year, I mean, all we have, I've said it so many times, but all we have are Mandalorian, the movies the movies they've announced, but nobody believes are actually happening until they shoot, and Ahsoka season 2. Those are the only things we know about. The only things we know about for next year are Mandalorian and Ahsoka season 2, and we don't know anything else for the rest of this year after Andor comes out. So there's going to be something. We know we have visions. We're probably going to get some other animation or maybe some specials. I mean, I think some of the announcements that could just knock people's socks off for sure would be something like, speaking of Legends earlier, bringing back Legends. If they did announce, hey, we're going to start an initiative to do animated films adapting Legends books, that would blow people's minds. If they said, hey, this is what our next animated project is, and it's coming out this year, that would blow people's minds. I think we're going to get a next animation announcement. I'd be shocked if we don't. But if it's coming out this year, I would be kind of surprised because we did just start hearing about them starting to work on it towards the end of last year. We'll see what's next, but yeah, I think most of our announcements are coming in the world of animation. That just seems right in terms of the pipeline. I don't think unless they've had a secret Star Wars project that they've been working on and are actually relatively far down the line with, we're getting any more live action anytime soon in terms of TV. And I think Ahsoka is probably going to target that similar date for next year that season 1 was, maybe end of summer, beginning of fall date. That has been a date that works for Star Wars in the past. I don't really see it coming out earlier than that. But yeah, I think this will be a big celebration, but I do truly believe that next year, 2026, the return to the United States for the first time since 2022, be 4 years. It's gonna be probably New York or LA again, Anaheim again. I think Mandalorian launching next year, they've got to come out with a bang next year. And Celebration will be like probably about a month before Mandalorian comes out. So they're really going to have to give it their all. Or I could be wrong about that. And the next big one is 2027 because that's the 50th anniversary year. And so that could be the year if Kathleen Kennedy does really leave at the end of this year, if they do find their new CEO, their new direction, whatever they do with the future of Star Wars and their future plan for Star Wars, whatever it is, that could be the year that we get like the next 2020 with the Investor Days thing where they're like, here are all these things we're working on. And depending on who's in charge and depending on who's attached, we can believe them or we cannot believe them. Because right now it doesn't sound that exciting if Star Wars came out and said, we're making these 10 things, because most of them never happen. But but if they were to do that, I think maybe 2027 could be that year because they do have stuff for 2026 that's coming out, and none of it will be out by the time Celebration rolls around next year. So if it is New York next year, and they do save Anaheim, which is usually their biggest ones, or
Yeah,
Anaheim,
yeah.
because everybody lives around there, so they can have people come easier, like meeting the talent. A lot of the talent, directors, writers, all those people live in California, Southern California. You can bring those people easier. They can showcase some of the stuff they're working on more easily. They have the setup. I mean, Anaheim Convention Center, the way it's transformed over the last 10 years is crazy. It's so much nicer. It's so much better now than it used to be. So it's built for that, and they have such a good relationship, obviously, there. Um, I maybe if Anaheim is 2027, if they announce that next year at the end of Celebration this year, if it's New York or it's Chicago or it's anywhere else besides Anaheim, I could very much so see 27 being the year that we really get that, like, these are the next 5 to 10 years of Star Wars projects. It's gotta happen. I don't know how soon.
Yeah. I hope, I really do hope for 50th it is Anaheim because we had a great time when we went in 22, and it would be such a shame if they don't do anything crazy like having another Star Wars night or like a Star Wars week and something for celebration fans, especially for the 50th. Like, go all out, go freaking all out. And if they were to do LA, it's not terrible, but you want to, it's Disney. Use Disneyland. Like, that'd be
Right.
it'd be such a mistake. Though, if they don't do LA, I don't think they're gonna go back to Orlando. I really think Orlando, from
Yeah.
even my friends who used to live back there, they're like, it's just a dead town unless you're. I think the convention center is massive, but, like, people who went back in 17 were like, "Yeah, but it was just, like, kinda weird, like, why are we here? It's such a huge spot," and it wasn't as entertaining as Chicago's, which was, I think, 5 days, actually, so, and people at least can go do other things on the days that they didn't buy tickets for, because it's such a rich city, so, yeah, I think Chicago's a good bet, New York's a good bet. New York, they have to be really on top of their transportation game. They better, like, and, we had such problems just, like, figuring out media passes back in 22, so I hope they're really on top of it, with if they go to New York, because you can't mess around with New York like that. It's just such a tight, congested city. But if they do something super classic, they can go to the home of the original celebration. I think it was, like, in Arizona or something. I don't remember where it
I
was.
think it might have been Indianapolis.
Indianapolis, yeah, just if they really wanna make it, like, a nice, beautiful, like, return to, like, where it all began, like, just like how the films are gonna be celebrating a huge milestone, yeah, I mean, I think that'd be great. I think that would be great. Hopefully, it doesn't rain and it's super muddy like it was the first time, and they were not prepared for, but I guess it'd be a bit nostalgic for all the troopers from the first celebration, be like, "Ah, yes, it's still as just as bad as I remember, if not more." So, I'd love to see that. LA is nice, don't get me wrong, but I think you have to say that for after Anaheim.
Yeah, I would be shocked if they did LA and not Anaheim just with the synergy of
Yeah,
Disney. Uh, so the first celebration, I just looked it up, was Denver, Colorado. Then
Colorado, right.
celebrations 2 and 3 were Indianapolis. Uh,
Okay.
and then, yeah, it's kind of in random places in the the past. I mean, for Star Wars, right? It's not one of the major media markets. And then Celebration 4 was LA. It's the only time they've done LA. Then they did Celebration Europe in London, Celebration Japan and Chiba. And then ever since then, it has been when it's in the United States in a Disney adjacent place. There's 2 times Orlando, twice Anaheim. Chicago has been our big outlier when it's in the United States. And then we have multiple overseas. So they've never, I can't believe they've never done New York. That is a surprise.
Yeah,
So maybe they'll do that because they have been, reaching out um, to more locations. I mean, this is the first time under Disney that we've gotten back to back overseas celebrations. So they are trying to reach out and expand. So we will see what they decide to do next. I mean, I know it's always I'm on the Star Wars Celebration Facebook group, and it's
yeah.
always like it's like Black Friday on there the day the celebration ends and they announce where it's going to be next. Everybody's like booking their flights and their hotels for the next year everywhere. So it's always fun to see what the community gets to do, and people look at it as their chance to get to go somewhere new. Um, it does sound a lot of fun to go somewhere new with a bunch of Star Wars fans, but also it's like it's going to be 10 times more expensive and um, uh, only have Star Wars fans everywhere. You don't get to experience a place like as it is. But hopefully, any of you going to Celebration Japan are going to have a lot of fun. We're going to scroll down. Actually, sorry to skip you guys, Anthony and Critical Thinker, just because I want to get to some other people who might be new to the chat, and we'll come right back to you guys as we're scrolling down. We have Three Davis who says, "Hello, what's up?" Hello, Three Davis. And then uh, after that, we have Freezy2324 who says, "Do you think Luke Skywalker will be heavily involved in Dave Filoni's Heir to the Empire movie?" That's one of the big questions. Is
Mm.
not just Luke Skywalker, but I mean Luke comes to mind obviously because he's already been in Mandalorian stuff. But Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Han Solo, those are the main characters of Heir to the Empire, the books. Lando Calrissian plays a role. Wedge Antilles plays a role. All the original characters play a role. C-3PO and R2-D2. So how are they going to utilize those characters, and what are they going to be doing during that time period? Excuse me. Luke has the best excuse for not being there just because he's actively during this time in canon setting up the Jedi Order, his Jedi Order. So he's at least doing something, but it still would not make any sense for the biggest hero in the galaxy not to show up to help in a massive conflict if it is indeed as big as they're trying to sell it to be the Thrawn threat. So I think he's got to be there now. Will he be a big character? Will he be heavily involved in Dave's movie? I tend to think not, unless they decide to go for a recast. I really just don't buy the fact that CGI Luke, deepfake Luke, is going to be the main character of a big budget movie. Maybe they can prove me wrong, but I just don't see him being anywhere near heavily involved. Will he be there? Yes. He will be there, whether it's recast or deepfake CGI. I think there will be that Avengers style scene of most of the big heroes teaming up, or most of the people talking around a table for tactics and stuff like that. So I would be shocked if Luke does not appear, but I wouldn't be shocked if he's not in a big role. Disappointing, yes. Could they just finally rip the band-aid off and give us, a chance to have a true Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, and Han Solo in the post Return of the Jedi timeline? They could. There will be backlash. There always will be, but if they do it right, doesn't matter how much backlash there is. If they do it right, people will get over it because I think more than anything, we're starving for those characters, and
Yeah.
I really would like to see them. So as much as I think it would be more serviceable to the characters to just have their stories done in books like they used to be. It would allow you to do big things, cool things, epic things, important things for those characters. If the important stories for Disney are to be told in live action, then you need them involved in live action at some point.
Nothing more I can add to that other than maybe if it does happen, it's gonna be more like a 3rd act for me. I think that's the right time to bring him in, and because there's rumors that, like, Mandalorian Grogu might start with Ezra, kinda, like, kicking things off. There's some things that were floating out there, so and the fact that Mandalorian Grogu, based on its success, could get, like, a sequel, and then you make this its own sort of trilogy or something like that, and then this Heir to the Empire, New Republic closer can kinda then feature Luke there, and then maybe the 2nd film is Ahsoka Leia or something, like, there's a lot of different angles you can really approach this by, it really does depend on the 1st film being a big success, right, or being the smart success, right? I don't expect it to become something that's like a billion-dollar film. If it gets to 700, 800, and with the fact that it's reusing a lot of its sets in kind of the same
Yeah,
way as, like, the Star Trek films of the '90s did, I think that's gonna be huge for Star Wars. That's just gonna be great for a step back financially, right? Like, let's forget I know maybe you could have the arguments, like, it's not creatively ambitious enough, and I wouldn't disagree with you, but if this is a way to, like, get the hottest property in Star Wars back onto even stronger footing than it was by the end of season 3, getting it as close to the peak that it had at the end of season 2. Yeah, I think that's only gonna be best for this, like, back half essentially of whatever this New Republic era is gonna look like with the picture film, with the picture of animation of live, action TV shows and whatnot, so I think that's when Luke kinda comes in, and that would allow them to deepfake if they really wanted to, but I think with when deepfake was kinda being used for Book of Boba Fett and being used for well, it wasn't used for Mandalorian, it was kinda just pure CGI there, um, with some mocap involved, but, I think some of the negativity towards AI in the last year and a half or so, I think is gonna really start pushing back against it, being like, "Let's just recreate everything, enhance, smoothen out things, do things like
Mhm.
that." Especially if everyone's acknowledging that's happening. It's not like something shady being done behind the actor's back or something. But if you can use it in a way that's meaningful, like, maybe just to bring back a Tarkin for like a 5-minute scene max in like Andor season 2, good. To use it as like a character that's fully fleshed out, living out in the world and all that. I'm not saying you can't do it, but I think it's just gonna be feeling so hollow. And Luke Skywalker is a character, whether you like him or not in canon or EU, he always has a deep, rich soul that you always are like, I want to see what it means for him to carry that on his face, his emotions. Despite him being so balanced quite often in his life, when he does get it unbalanced, it is really interesting to see them to do that. So I'd like to see him be ferocious and he'll do all these different things. And I don't think AI is quite there yet. And I don't think it's worthwhile to take that away from someone who can really embody the spirit of the character. Now, am I going to say Graham Hamilton or whoever the guy's name was from Book of Boba Fett should be our Luke? No. No, I still want somebody who's a capable actor. I don't want someone who's mostly just been relegated to like doing the sort of stunt double mocap work. If he's got a great resume now and you can make him look a little bit better with prosthetics and makeup and then just use a little bit of deep faking or something, go with that. Sure, that's fine. But I'll push back against people who are like, "We have the perfect look already." It's like, no, that's a combination of Mark Hamill being on set, what Filoni and Favreau are working on there, the technology of ILM. Yes, obviously Hamilton stepping into the role and being a bit better of a fit than the guy who was in Mando season 1 because the face model worked even better. But
Yeah.
yeah, I really don't like when I hear people say like, "Oh, you've got everything perfectly there." It's like, no, that's not how acting works. It really isn't. Essentially he's like with how the process works on Mandalorian on all these volume-based shows with post-production comes first and all that. His stuff is just kinda like the stuff that you add in to polish in later. They don't really need him, and when you shoot a proper film, if you have to suddenly have Luke be a big character, do all the post-production first, no, that would be terrible. That'd be horrible for process, especially for most filmmakers who don't do that. So, yeah, go for live action, recast. If you gotta do some things with them included just to make it look smooth and all that, great. Do whatever. Let him have a role, like, just like how Matt Lanter got to play a character in the New Republic and Mandalorian season 1, just do that with these actors. Give them roles that they can be live action actors, but don't suddenly say, "Oh, we're gonna go away from deep fake entirely because we have exactly who we needed from the start." Then it's like, why didn't you do that then?
Well, in the deepfake thing, like, I think it works fine for an action scene, or it works fine for one scene. Like, it was great in Book of Boba Fett. It can
Yeah,
absolutely work. It's just delaying and prolonging the inevitable, right? We have to recast, and I think I've always been an anti-recaster just because it just doesn't feel right, but one of the reasons it doesn't feel right with Alden and Han is the fact that it's a one and done, right? It's hard to accept anyone for a one and done, and I think that's where they've already screwed up, is if, the debut of our new Luke Skywalker is in Filoni's movie, and it's the first time you ever see him, it'll be really hard to accept whoever it is as Luke Skywalker. But if they play the character for 10 years, just like Ewan McGregor and Alec Guinness, we start to see them as the same person because they played the character for a significant amount of time.
yeah,
So it's one of those things that if you're going to do it, you have to commit. And I don't know if they're ready to commit yet, but I would encourage them to commit because I think these characters are the heart and soul of Star Wars. Yeah, you might not be able to capture that same spirit without Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford. I think, though, to me, the hardest one to recast is Harrison Ford, and they've already done that. And I would say relatively successfully, even though Alden's not my favorite Han Solo, and it's still somebody I don't necessarily see as Han Solo in my head ever. If you gave him 5 movies or he played Han for years, I might have started to think of him as Han, even if it's kind of a different Han. Like, I kinda see Vader and Hayden Christensen's Anakin as 2 different people,
yeah,
but they're the
yeah,
same person. But that's the duality of Anakin, right? That's kinda what you're supposed to see. With Han Solo, it should feel like the same person. With Luke Skywalker, it should feel like the same person. And to me, I feel like Obi-Wan and or Alec Guinness and Ewan McGregor are the same person because I grew up with both of them for so many years. And I feel like that's the thing you have to really go for with this is you have to commit, you have to tell stories that span this entire 30-year gap and focus on those characters because they are the heart and soul of Star Wars. No matter what's popular, Mandalorian can be popular, but it's never going to be Star Wars like Luke, Leia, and Han. Even the prequel characters won't be Star Wars like Luke, Leia, and Han. Nobody can be Star Wars like Luke, Leia, and Han. It's what started Star Wars. They were the thing that people fell in love with. And so figuring out what those characters do, it can only help. You can't really get away from it. It has to be a part of your universe if you're tackling this time period. There's no logical reason why Luke, Leia, and Han would be doing nothing while the biggest threat to the galaxy since the Empire shows up. And they're like, oh, well, let's let the Mandalorian and Ezra and Hera tackle it and we'll just sit back and watch. It's like it just doesn't make any sense. There's always going to be that specter of the past hanging over it because it's just the nature of the beast with the time period they've picked to tell. If they wanted to not have to worry about these characters, they should have made a Mandalorian show in the Old Republic or the High Republic or 200 years after the events of Return of the Jedi. And then you don't have to worry about Luke, Leia, and Han. But if you want to not have to do that, yep, Travis Mitchell, that's what I was going for. Yeah, if you don't want to have to worry about these characters, then you can go in a different time period. But they picked this, they picked their poison, they decided to make the Mandalorian much bigger than it really was ever intended to be. And in doing so, now they have to deal with the consequences of that, and they have to make decisions that are tough. We will see what they do. Latina Sunshine 84 says hi. Hi, Latina Sunshine 84. Travis says, how's it going, guys? Tales of the Droids would be a great idea. Imagine C-3PO being turned on for the first time after Anakin builds him, Dio witnessing Ochi hunt and kill Rey's parents, and Hu Yang meeting young Mace Windu or Yoda. That's a cool idea. Could be next. We'll see. We'll see what they announce. I mean, they had that droid story that they announced in 2020, and we haven't heard about it since. So could they take ideas from that and spin it into a Tales of the Droids? Might be the next big idea for them.
I'd love to see something like that. I think that's a nice bridge past Visions. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, what is it called? I do think that we are gonna get an anime at some point, and I don't think uh, Tales of the Droids would necessarily translate that way. I don't know if we'd really want to even use Clone Wars animation. Right? Maybe go for something smaller scale and like just do vignettes, right, with all these sort of stories. I'd love to see stuff like that, or just do like one animated version of like a Disney Plus special presentation.
Travis also says Sam Witwer talked about how. Oh, okay, yeah, I didn't skip a question. Never mind. Sam Witwer talked about how Dave and George toyed with the last Clone Wars arc to be a movie like the beginning. I could see Filoni revealing his movie going to be animated. The original Clone Wars movie was a random arc of episodes stitched into a movie, and it wasn't the most cinematic one to do. I think Dave has that itch to do a proper animated film on the big screen. That's a nice idea, Travis, but they've already announced it as a live action movie. So unless they change it, which I'm not, putting past them because there's basically zero traction on Dave Filoni's movie since Ahsoka season 2 got greenlit. And basically since Mandalorian and Grogu became an idea over at Lucasfilm, they haven't thought about Dave's movie. It was always supposed to be the finale of the Mandalorian timeline, and then since they came up with the idea of basically restarting the Mandalorian, like because Mandalorian and Grogu, a lot of people still think it's Mando season 4. It is going to be a complete restart. Basically, it's going to softly reintroduce the main characters of the show. It's going to softly introduce Mandalorian and Grogu. It's going to softly reintroduce the conflict and Thrawn and what's going on with the Imperial Remnant. Season 3, for all intents and purposes, ended the Mandalorian story. Ahsoka is now its own thing. Boba Fett is probably its own thing. Everything is rebooted basically for this movie. So I think what Dave's movie was originally very well could change. And in fact, since they announced the movie, he wasn't CCO of Lucasfilm. He's now CCO of Lucasfilm. He might not even be making a movie anymore. But I do think an animated movie would be kind of more in his wheelhouse. But we will see. I don't think the big finale of The Mandalorian, though, will be animated. Um, so that's where I disagree with like the fact that that has any basis in reality, but I don't think it's out of the question that he could make a really cool, maybe semi-important animated movie in this time period, maybe even tackling Luke, Leia, and Han. Um, but it's not going to be the movie that they announced already.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna change when it does really feel like that. I mean, at one point with 23 celebration, everyone's like, okay, Dawn of the Jedi is one thing. This Mandalorian film was not even an idea yet. Though it was like it's like the Mandalorian verse. The Mando verse is gonna end with this New Republic film with Dave Filoni, and then we're gonna also have the I'm blanking on the third film. The was it even a third film? It was the
Dawn of the Jedi?
Dawn of the Jedi, New Republic, and then
Oh, New Jedi Order, I think it was
New
the
Jedi Order.
third
I'm
movie.
blanking there. Yeah, it was New Jedi Order, right? So they're all gonna sort of have connections there, formed out of Ahsoka, formed out of all these TV shows, kind of planting some seeds. And I think that's still in largely to some effect gonna affect one of those films, but maybe not all three like originally envisioned and tying all those three together in some way and creating their new eras, their new periods of time that want to be explored at the little corners of Star Wars. So yeah, it's gonna change without a doubt, but, I'm hoping for the best, so I'm not stressing about it. It would be, like, kind of in character, like you're saying, Travis, that he'd be like, "Oh, I'm doing an animated film," but, if he does an animated film, it's because he's doing that first before he does his full film, and or, like, he's doing that because someone else is gonna handle the final film, right? Instead of like, "Hey, we're gonna end the Mandoverse with animation." I think everyone would just be upset about that, animation fans and live action fans.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it would be awesome for him to get out there and announce a new animated film. And there's no reason Star Wars shouldn't be a part of animated filmmaking. They
Yeah.
have one of Star. There's like Lucasfilm is an interesting studio because people act like, oh, how much Star Wars can we really get out of one studio? Are they overdoing it? Blah blah blah. Right? But really, in reality, with the studio used to be self-backed. It was never a public company. It was completely owned by George Lucas himself, who ran it and funded his own money into everything that the studio did, from ILM to Skywalker Sound to Star Wars to Indiana Jones to Willow to every IP that they took a chance on through LucasArts, through TV, through film, whatever. Now it's backed by the biggest multimedia company in the world. And so the fact that it's a studio that makes basically one thing and has the money from such a big, huge multimedia conglomerate like Disney really means we should be getting more and more avenues. I'm not saying overdo Star Wars, but if you want to not overdo Star Wars, that's when you branch out into other mediums, right? You double down on books and comics, you double down on animation and animated TV and animated film. And we've seen something like Spider-Verse succeed so wildly by coming up with new innovative animation styles and telling stories that are similar to the things we've seen in live action, but different, and utilizing the medium to its fullest extent. There's no reason Star Wars can't do that. Sony, for all intents and purposes, is very similar to Lucasfilm in the sense that they kind of do focus on one IP. They are much bigger and they focus on many projects, obviously, but Spider-Man is their bread and butter. It's what makes them the most money. And so with a company like Lucasfilm, there's really no reason why, especially with a dedicated animation department, they shouldn't jump into live action film. So I would love it if they announced that they were getting into animation, animated film. If they announced they're bringing it back, it was something near and dear to George Lucas's heart. Obviously, George Lucas, a lot of people don't realize, created Pixar. His company created Pixar and then sold it off to Apple with Steve Jobs. So like that's always been a big part of Lucasfilm and what a- um, George Lucas has done with his company and his brand. And I'd love to see Star Wars return to that because it is something that they very well could do, have the resources to do, have the team to do, and already have a division dedicated towards. Um,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
it really just makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, as much as I love the Clone Wars animation style, it's about time that they move forward. And if they're gonna go into films, I would not want them to just be like, "Oh, here's it, like let's do it like that," right? And the whole stitching thing that you're talking about with the original couple episodes of Clone Wars that aren't even chronologically the first few. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's perfect by any means. I think they smoothed it out where they could. But there was also rumors in 2020 that the whole Siege of Mandalore might get like a limited theatrical run where it's all kind of connected
Mhm,
together. So, and that never came through. So clearly they're still thinking about it, or maybe they don't see a future in it, but I don't see how they couldn't. I think maybe they're hoping to start working with like animation from Japan, because anime films are huge right now. That's how like
mhm.
a lot of anime are just ending, right? They're like, yeah, forget about like a season show and finish it off with like an OVA or something. They're like, no, we're straight up just gonna put it in theaters because we know we can make more money this way, and then just put it on TV later. And it's like, yeah, why not, right? And especially if it's gonna have that slightly more premium, crispier look to it, definitely think that's gonna be something that can be done. I just don't want the Clone Wars animation to be our first reintroduction for animated film in Star Wars. Like it's lovely and all. I just think now that it's been so well used and perfected and all that, go for something new, push the limits of animation. Western animation has been behind Eastern animation for a while now. And yeah, I'm not going to deny that the work conditions are way more horrendous in Japan for a lot of those animators and all that. That's true. They don't get paid anywhere near the same. They're got crazy hours, and they oftentimes have to like put out subpar work sometimes and then go back for like the Blu-ray and then like clean it up then. I wouldn't want that to happen here, but I also don't love some of the current trends in like Western animation where it's like, oh, you look at Cartoon Network, everything's kind of like chibi style kind of sort of animation. When 5 years before you had stuff like The Amazing World of Gumball, you had Adventure Time, you had regular show where, yeah, it was different. It was never trying to be like the most incredible animation, but it was actually trying to push something very interesting in each and every show instead of like everybody's gonna look like Teen Titans Go, right? Like, let's not do that, right? That's too much of an extreme too. So yeah, I mean, I think the Eastern animation needs to learn to be a little bit kinder to its employees, and I think Western animation needs to learn to like spread its wings again, right? At one point, Disney was the place of animation, right? It's not like Star Wars is working and Lucasfilm is working with a company that doesn't know animation. The golden age of animation basically was under Walt Disney. So it's like, why can't this studio that was built off the back of that not come back into it again with another studio that's had some very groundbreaking work in at least the modern age when it comes to animation on TV? So yeah, I hope for the best thing there.
All right, well, we're gonna wrap up our stream here pretty soon. I'm gonna go back to the top here for a couple more questions from those people who we skipped a little bit earlier because of repeated questions, and then we're gonna wrap it up for tonight. Thank you guys so much for sending in your questions tonight. Again, if you want to get one last one on here as we wrap up super chat, you can send in a super chat, and we will get to it before the stream is over. All right, so I believe we left off on Critical Thinker said, did you read Doomsday Clock and what do you think of it?" I did read Doomsday Clock. I was a little disappointed by the time it was over. Was really on board when they started, even though it was controversial to have Watchmen characters in DC, and I did feel like it was kind of a gimmick. But I was on board at the beginning because I really wanted to see what was going on, and then Jeff Johns had so many delays, and it took so long for the story to wrap up. It just kind of fizzled for me. But it was a decent event. It wasn't anything ultra special. It's not something I remember very well, but I did, I do remember liking it. But I liked it at the beginning a little more than the end.
Yeah.
Critical Thinker says, you mentioned a previous stream that even the best Star Wars comics are rarely as good as the better Marvel DC stuff. If you were in charge of Star Wars comic branch of Marvel editorial, how would you change this? That's a good question. I think inherently it's just kind of hard to ever be as good as the elite superhero comics. One, the form of comic books is not Star Wars's original form. Uh, Superhero comics, that's their original form. So I think they handle the storytelling there. Secondly, the investment for 80 plus years into a lot of these characters is one of the things that makes superhero storytelling compelling in the on the comic medium. Whereas Star Wars is always going to be battling with like, what did we do in the live action films and how does this compare? And so I think even though Star Wars comics, especially under Marvel and Disney, have given more important storytelling and filled more important gaps than you would expect, especially compared to novels, which have filled very few important gaps. It's just I tend to never think of Star Wars comics as like top tier comics, but they can get there. I think one of the main things you have to do, there would be two things I would push for. One is a doubling down on original characters and comic medium based characters. I like Dr. Aphra. I think it's a good book. She's a fun character. I don't know if she's needed to have comics for the last 10 years, but I like that an original character has gotten her own book for that long. I think Star Wars needs more of that, whether it's somebody cool and more badass like a superhero type character, whether it's uh, uh, going back in a different time period and exploring different things. Star Wars needs to have things that are more original in order to, I think, really truly excel in that medium because it's a medium that's dominated by famous IP that was created for that medium. So I think Star Wars needs to do that. That's first and foremost. And then secondly, use those original characters to actually tell compelling, relevant, and important stories, not just something like Afra is more fun. And it's a good, fun book, and it's an enjoyable escape, but it's not something that you feel like, wow, this changed the way I looked at Star Wars. And I think in order for you to really get that, you need to go in a different time period than around the films, and you need to do original characters that can actually put their stamp on Star Wars storytelling. Something like Legacy, not the best storytelling ever, but it always is memorable for me because it carves out an era of Star Wars that never existed before. And so I think High Republic comics would be better remembered if they both weren't hampered by the fact that they're connected to the books and like sometimes things just happen. Like, you know, recently with High Republic comics, Phase Three's comic ended, and then a lot of the payoff for Phase Three comics was in an audio drama. And then now they're getting
Yeah.
into another wave of comics post that Phase Three run that's going to have to reconcile with the fact that a lot of the major character beats they set up weren't in the actual medium of the comic books. And so that's why I think High Republic's relatively fallen flat outside of some of the miniseries because they're able to tell complete stories. Whereas if you jumped into its own comic exclusive timeline, you did like a similar High Republic esque thing where you're in between the Old Republic and the prequels, but jumped even closer to the Old Republic and told stories there that were comic only, really stretched out and used the comic medium. That's when you'll tell more compelling, more interesting, more unique stories. So those would be kind of the two things I would focus on with Star Wars. I think rarely would you ever get a Star Wars comic that would reach the heights of the elite comics stories of all time. But if you were to get there, I think you would have to utilize more original stuff.
Yeah, I agree a lot about that because I think it's already starting to happen. Maybe not necessarily with comics, but we've seen the Path of the Lightsaber kind of be manga be announced, and I think that's going to be really awesome for stuff to be original and mostly disconnected from what we already have in the little gap of 8 to 9, right? So very curious if it's going to be able to branch off into its own thing. Uh, I mean, I know it maybe doesn't work logistically as well as we'd like it to, but I love to see manga, an original manga, which I mean, the Edge of Balance stuff has been really good, especially Precedent. I haven't read Edge of Balance Volume 3 yet, and I know 4 is coming out soon or already has, but I really love Precedent. I thought that was a great
Mhm.
story. Even if it's tied to a different initiative, it was like it carved its own little niche about it. And it's actually having payoff with a lot of Phase 3 stuff, especially with like
Yeah.
Tears of the Nameless. So it's not like it's impossible to do, but something I'd like to see is manga and comics have like kind of crossovers and connections. I think with how big anime and manga have become now, it'd be a shame not to have the eastern part of the world meet the western part of the world, right? And have them be like, "Oh my god, that character showed up," and you don't have to worry about too much about their story, but it's cool that they cameoed there, and then vice versa, right? So I'd love to see some of that stuff happen. I think it's inevitability if the Path of the Lightsaber manga is good that we get to see some of these characters in a different medium as like a supporting character or something like that. And then likewise, you need to take some of these comic characters and give them animation to jump into. You can do stuff like Tales of, just start putting them in places where more eyeballs are there, right? Uh, as much as we love comics, comics are not the same as the 40s, the 60s, the 80s, the 2000s. It's a shrinking world, unfortunately. But a lot of people who do read it digitally now. So why wouldn't they also just swap over to Disney Plus and see like that character make an appearance there, right? If we can see
Mhm.
animated characters go up to live action, which is a lot harder, honestly, why can't we see comic characters go up to animation where you there is a lot less of a difficulty to pull off? So that's what I would want to say. More than anything else, just work with what you've got between those cross mediums that actually make sense to cross, and then bridge the gaps between the different parts of the world that are merging into like Star Wars fandoms. Like that's a great way to reach out to them and then have the existing fandom like be like, "Oh, okay, I want to check that out," or like, "Oh, like there's some cool synergy happening here." And an animation, that's gonna always be something the older world appreciates in some way. So more and more so again. So I'd love to see that. New eras, like Liam said, Legacy. I like a lot of Legacy. I found some of the stuff in Legacy Volume 2 a little stronger, but it was also cut short in a lot of ways. So but what Legacy did, right? It carved its own little space. You need more original eras that are just dominated by that. I'd love to see a new Legacy happen. Maybe not the same story or time period or anything, but like that effort to being put into it, right? Before Legacy, the last thing that was like to that same level of effort and prestige combined, probably Dark Empire. You could say maybe the very beginning of Star Wars 98, but I wouldn't agree with that. And Republic was good, but it was just another ongoing comic for a lot of people. It wasn't like you're carving out a new thing. You were still kind of fitting in with all the events. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's how I would look at it, honestly. And I think that's the right way to go about it to get us as close as possible to where we were in 2015 when like we got revelations from comics like Boba informing Vader of the name of the pilot for the Death Star. So stuff like that needs to happen again, but do it with original characters and mediums that can more seamlessly cross over and expand the Star Wars audience and the mediums that they're more aware of.
Critical Thinker, piggybacking off of that, says personally, I'd love to see either larger scale runs and initiatives that really take risks or just higher quality comic runs with creators willing to push the boundaries of the medium. And I think, yeah, I mean, that's always welcome. Star Wars doesn't necessarily get the people who are at the forefront of the industry, right? Because a lot of the industry is shaped by superhero comics, and those are the probably the publishers that are paying the most money. I mean, the most money you're going to make is writing a Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, X-Men book, right? You're not going to make as much money on a Star Wars book, especially an original IP Star Wars book. So it would have to be a labor of love. And then secondly, um, Star Wars isn't what you think of when you think of comics. So if you're somebody who's an aspiring comic writer and has always wanted to write comics and you break in with an indie book and people love it, is the next thing you're going to do Star Wars? Or if you got the opportunity to do Green Lantern, would you rather do that? Is that something that's more in your dreams as a writer, right? So I think that's the battle they're always going to have. And even though, like you're mentioning, I mean, Ostrander, it next to Charles Soule, probably the biggest name that's ever taken on Star Wars. I think Ostrander. I'm trying to think of anybody else. I can't think of. I mean, I know Alan Moore wrote Star Wars.
Was
For the
Veitch really big in other comics? I don't think so.
Veitch is a popular writer, but I wouldn't say he's an all time. Like he doesn't have an all time great run. In terms of Marvel DC. Ostrander had Suicide Squad, and he basically changed Suicide Squad forever and like kind of shaped it into what it is today. The only other people I can think of, like Jason Aaron had Thor, that was one of the seminal runs of the 2010s for Marvel. Charles Soule, even before Star Wars, though, wasn't Charles Soule. Like he had his Daredevil run, he had some other things, but he wasn't Charles Soule that we all know, And and I'm trying, like, Alan Moore wrote Star Wars before he was Alan Moore. The only other person I can think of is like the original Marvel Dream Team for Star Wars was Roy Thomas, I believe, who let me relook that up to make sure. But I believe it was Roy Thomas with Howard Chaykin doing the art, and Howard Chaykin was a big time comic artist and writer. He did a lot of really famous books. So let's see. I believe it was Roy Thomas. Yeah, it was Roy Thomas. And Roy Thomas wrote the Avengers for years and years and years before he wrote Star Wars. So he was already like, in terms of getting people who before they wrote Star Wars were famous and really big. Roy Thomas is maybe the biggest person they've ever gotten, and Ostrander is probably next. John Jackson Miller wasn't much of a Star Wars or like a writer anywhere in comics until he took on KOTOR. So there were, they've had a lot of big writers, but ultimately, I think it really is, when you hone in on it, they haven't ever really been able to like go get a guy who's in the peak of their prime in terms of comic writing and be like, let's write Star Wars. Maybe honestly, Jason Aaron is probably the closest example to that, because even Ostrander was kind of slowly phasing out of comics by then. He was a little older when he switched to like being a Star Wars only writer. But yeah, I think Aaron is maybe their like biggest get, and that was probably mostly just because Marvel, excuse me, at the time, I think he was writing Marvel's Avengers book when Star Wars came out, and he had just come off of Thor, which was like his thing, that made him super famous. And so it was probably Disney and Marvel being like, hey, you're one of our best writers right now. We really need to start Star Wars in a good way. Can you handle this right now too while you're doing our other famous books? I think that's kind of more why he did Star Wars. I'd like to see them now be like, yeah, we got Tom King or something. Or we got I'm trying to think who's big right now in Marvel, because I don't really read Hickman. If we got Jonathan Hickman, that would be insane. I'd love to see a Jonathan Hickman Star Wars book. But yeah, it's I think that would be one of the big things, is to see if they could pull somebody who's like an all-time great, or at least top of the industry currently, writer. And then this will be our last questions, or I'll just go over the comments that are piggybacking off of this. Travis Mitchell says a name people haven't really talked about is Charles Soule, who's been quietly doing some of the heaviest lifting in new canon, even making his way to the TV side with The Acolyte. I could see Soule taking a similar role to that of Filoni somewhere down the line. I don't know if that big, because he doesn't really have any real experience in TV or film, but maybe in animation. That's a
Oh yeah.
place where a lot of these people start. And then a Critical Thinker says, wouldn't be happy about that. Souls Vader is great, but outside of that, he's a very mixed bag. He has an acclaimed Daredevil run as well, and he's done mostly good Star Wars comics. So I disagree with that, Critical Thinker, but
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think
I think we're forgetting about the Lando miniseries. That was
yeah.
incredible, and that was his like basic introduction to Star Wars. So, no, I'm sorry, I got to push back hard on that one. Soul is not a mixed bag. He's had some extended runs, like the last Star Wars 2020, but even that, I was like, yeah, it's still solid. But yeah, no, he's not a mixed bag.
I would disagree with the mixed bag comment as well. I would say he gets, because he's one of the longest running Star Wars authors, and most of what he's done has been good. I think he gets overinflated with like how incredible everything he's done in Star Wars has been, because a lot of it has just been good, like you're saying. Like I don't think his 2020 run on Star Wars, there were very few volumes that I thought were exceptional.
Yeah,
But when Soul, when we have, it's kind of like Claudia Gray, to where like when we have gotten the best comics in canon, most of them have all been Soul. So, and he
yeah.
writes so much that you can have more good to average stuff as well come out of him, because he writes so much. But yeah, I wouldn't say anything I've read from him has really been underwhelming. It's at
Yeah.
least all been good, if not great.
And I
And
think
then
the only issue that people have ever had with him is like all the crossovers that happened in
yeah,
2020, right? And but if you actually read the crossover material that he wrote, like the actual mini series for those, I thought those were actually pretty good. It was just really just every other main line being connected and pushed together and shoved into the place that was unnecessary. That's where I think a lot of us were like, oh, okay. But No, he's not a mixed bag. I get loving a lot of the stuff that was more in the 2000s. That's totally fair, but he is considered one of the more modern, beloved Star Wars writers and just comic writers too, because he did some very defining things,
Yeah.
right? He does Daredevil run doesn't get adapted partly into Born Again if it wasn't for Star Wars being that big and continuous of a success for him over different stories.
And then Critical Thinker, or no, Travis Mitchell says, I haven't read a lot of DC Marvel, but the single issue C3PO Red Arm story is one of the best comics I've read. That is an underrated one
Yeah.
from the past. And then Critical Thinker says the Ostrander Dursema stuff got closest to being that good by trying to be as important and connecting to as many big events as possible. And it is. I mean, they got the most opportunity to carve out
Yeah.
the most different spaces and different eras with really long runs, like Legacy obviously being 50 plus issues, and then handling pretty much all of the Clone Wars side of Republic. They got to carve out spaces because when we think about the Clone Wars, you think of it as more structured, but when they were writing it, it was an empty amorphous blob. It was just novels and the episodes that we were getting over the course of 3 years for 2003 Clone Wars. So it wasn't necessarily as carved out. So they've had the opportunity to really define different eras of Star Wars, and I'd love to see somebody given that opportunity again. Because really, when you have even the like Aaron run and all the stuff in between the original trilogy, it's hard to really define those eras because you're trying to get people from point A to point B. I think Soul had the biggest opportunity in crafting a Luke that got from Empire to Return of the Jedi, but really the change between the characters between A New Hope and Empire isn't as dramatic as the changes between Empire and Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely.
And then just to wrap this up, Travis says we need a Salacious Crumb ongoing with his sidekick, the Eope who farts at the pod race. I would read it. I'd read
Yeah.
anything with those random characters. Give me a Malakili series, give me a Max Rebo Band series, and give me who else? I'm blanking on like a Jack Porkin series or Wilro Hood series. Anybody like that, I would read that.
Just call it the Glup Shadows, and that's it. That'd be an
Yeah,
incredible miniseries just to
yeah, it's
finally
like
lean into that.
it's basically Tails, but only the Glup Shadows, not just doesn't have like ever a Yoda story or a Darth Maul
Yeah.
story. Uh, and then Critical Thinker wrapping this up says, funny thing is that those few Alan Moore Star Wars comics are way better than like all the modern Star Wars comics coming out now. Very reminiscent of his Green Lantern stuff. I haven't read much Hickman, but I'd be hyped if they said they were writing, he was writing a new Star Wars comic. I mean, he honestly would be one of the perfect people. You would have to give him complete free reign because he likes to go insane with his books, but he is somebody who really always dives into the sci-fi fantasy elements of Marvel, and he really goes for it. And he is all in. So you'd have to, like, as Lucasfilm story group, you'd have to say, okay, Jonathan, you can write anything you want, and you're gonna create an era. It can be 7,000 years after the events of the Skywalker saga, so it doesn't screw anything up. But he can do his own thing. It just they just have to be ready for the fact that he goes all in,
Yeah.
and he doesn't really seem to work on anything that he's not allowed to go all in on. So I would be hyped as well.
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna
That's a
happen.
tough. That's a tough one to pull up. I love it. I think everyone, and you said it yourself. I think you don't even need to know who Hickman is, but you know his reputation, right? So,
Yeah,
100% agree. I will push back on the more Star Wars comics because he only ever wrote like Empire Strike Back monthly comics, never really ongoings for like one of the big publishers. And yes, comics are incredible in different mediums. I mean, Calvin and Hobbes is just newspaper strips, right? I'm not going to deny that, but yeah, I don't know if I'd say like all of this modern Star Wars comics. That's I think that's pretty dismissive, honestly. But I mean, if you like them, great. I've only glanced through them, but there's some interesting things about like Vader being a good, really analytical mind chess player, and that shows what Alan Moore's maturity was like approaching what his comics, especially right before Watchmen, and kind of plotting that he had. But he only wrote like 4 or 5 issues, and they were like old disconnected stories. So I wouldn't really compare them to, and I don't think it's fair to compare them to ongoings, to minis, things that are like planned out incredibly so compared to like a monthly magazine filled with multiple different comics and short stories.
Well, that's going to have to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Excuse me. And for all your questions and your comments and your theories and the discussion. We had such good discussion tonight on a night that we didn't have any news. We still went for over 2 hours. So that was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for everybody who's come out to support the show tonight. Next week, we should be back on our Tuesday time slot. So if you've been excited or waiting for us to get back to that or unsure because I believe all of our last 5 episodes have been on different days. So um, if you've been somebody who's unsure about what we're doing, hopefully you join us on Tuesdays now. We'll be back on Tuesdays. One of the reasons we keep Tuesdays is you guys seem to like it. Also, the shows come out on Tuesdays. So something like Andor, we can just shuffle in for the show. So it's a great day for us, works for us. We're just excited to get back to that. So hopefully you guys join us next Tuesday. Hopefully there's some more news to discuss. If not, bring your questions, bring your comments, bring anything you'd like to discuss. We had fun discussions tonight on every realm, and we really did kind of cover almost every medium of Star Wars tonight, as well as some comic books with Marvel and DC. A lot of fun stuff to talk about. So bring in anything you would like next week in the worlds of Star Wars, comics, video games, novels, whatever you want to discuss. Bring it next week, and we will discuss it, even if there's not much news. Keep an eye on the channel. We have a lot more content coming out. We have videos every Friday, as well as other times of the week. We also have shorts every other day during the main part of the week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, polls twice a day, every day. I just started doing some more polls on my other channel. If you want more polls, check them out over there. But yeah, a lot of great content coming out for Star Wars Lads. Hopefully we get more news here as we ramp up towards Celebration and Andor Season 2 coming in April. Thank you so much for watching tonight's stream, everybody, and we will see you all next week.